Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you. I just got done watching episode 2 of the Monday Night Wars documentary set that's on the WWE Network. And honestly, I might have turned on this set. I thought that the first episode, which was almost like a mini documentary of its own, going about an hour, talking about the war begins between WCW and WWE, I thought that was one of the best documentary specials that they've ever done. I thought that blew away the Monday Night Wars documentary back from 2002, 2003. But episode 2 honestly started out really great, but honestly let me down a little bit. This was about the rise of the nWo. This debuted yesterday. And from this documentary set, it's just basically a 1-hour set about how the nWo was set up and started. A lot of this stuff is in the two documentaries that they've already made on the nWo. One is called the Revolution, I believe. That's the newer one that's came out. And then they have the nWo documentary from back in 2003 as well. They came out with Hogan, Hall, and Nash on this. This one, once again, we get to see Eric Bischoff hanging out, doing the interview in front of the Monday Night Raw set from back in 2003. We've seen this, basically this interview almost in every documentary that's been made about anything WCW-ish. We've heard this and we've seen this 1,000 times. We do get a new interview with Scott Hall where it looks like they went and interviewed him at his house out in Atlanta. Might have been at DDP's house. And he talks about how, basically they put this stuff together where basically Diesel and Razor Ramon were two of the fresh faces coming up in the WWF, since a lot of the people had bolted WWF to go to WCW. They were sort of, re-upping. Diesel was the champion. Razor Ramon was having great matches against Shawn Michaels for the Intercontinental Championship. You don't hear from Bret Hart at all, but you get to see a lot of clips about Bret Hart and the Undertaker basically saying that was what WWF was at the time. Lots of shots at WWF and the new generation that they were putting out there, basically saying that it was family entertainment, where they're putting guys out there like Duke the Dunkster Droese, Doink, the Godwins. Nobody wanted to see that style of wrestling anymore. Basically, WCW and Eric Bischoff went out and they signed the two, fresh faces and brought them in to sort of bring, WCW a fresh face of their own. It just happened to be that they were two of the freshest fresh faces from WWF. When Scott Hall came and made his debut on WCW, he, said the most famous words in wrestling history: "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." Basically stating that, he was from WWF and he was coming there to start the war that a lot of people like me, dreamed up of seeing. I mean, lots of wrestling magazines out there played off of this and made lots of magazine sales with covers such as Macho Man Randy Savage versus Sting, Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan, Undertaker versus, I don't know who would have fought Undertaker back then, but basically, comparing people in each company. Who would be the dream match for each person if Vince and Bischoff would have got together for one night and booked this dream sort of show. If you were a big nWo fan and you just wanted to see the rise of them, this is a great documentary thing for you. But I think as long as you're talking about the nWo, you have to talk about the rise as well as the fall. Some people will think that nWo never had a fall, basically because nWo was an angle that ran from the beginning of 1996 all the way to the end of company of 2001. Basically, Kevin Nash, whether he was a babyface, whether he was heel, he was always repping the nWo. Trying to find a new way to sell a different style of T-shirt. We've seen the nWo black and white. We saw nWo Wolfpack, nWo Hollywood, nWo Silver and Black, nWo 2000, the LWO. There was 1,000 different sort of organizations that popped up along the way. You get to see the talk about basically Eric Bischoff having to convince Hulk Hogan at the last hour, basically, of Bash at the Beach, that this was the move to make, and they talk about how Sting was the backup plan, and Scott Hall says that, the plan never would have worked. It never would have gone over to the point it was if Sting was the third man of the nWo, basically because Sting wasn't a WWE guy, and there's no other WWE name like Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan was that name that got them to the point they were at in the WWF. There was no star bigger than him in the 80s, being, the stars of so many WrestleManias, the movie, the cartoons that they made. There was nobody in wrestling with a name like Hulk Hogan all throughout the world. And basically, the reaction that they got at Bash at the Beach with the fans throwing the trash into the ring, there was nothing you could do to basically top that. I've never been a fan of thinking that was really a true angle. I think it was drawn out from a long time. I think Hulk Hogan sort of started this story saying that he had to be convinced at the last hour that he didn't think a heel turn was going to work. I don't see why else Hogan would have not been booked for the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, which was basically their SummerSlam, the second biggest show of the year. If Hulk Hogan was having to be convinced of this at the last minute, more than likely Hogan would have had some sort of match on the show, seeing how the main event was basically a 6-man tag. It definitely would have had Hulk Hogan, defending in some sort of a match. I don't think he would have been able to go for the championship, because I think at the time the nWo started, I think Randy Savage was the actual WCW champion, and he was involved in that 6-man. But I don't see why Hogan wouldn't have had a match against Flair or any other sort of heel on the roster at that time. The nWo was one of my favorite times in wrestling. It's when I really started to get. I don't think I ever really lost my faith in wrestling, but it really re-upped me as a wrestling fan. Basically, with wrestling becoming, the pop culture where a lot of fans were jumping on board. I'll never forget being a wrestling fan and sort of being a closet wrestling fan, where I loved it and I would watch Nitro, I would watch Raw. I can't remember when I was in high school if I was still able to watch Superstars or not. I think I was just mainly sticking to the cable show because that was basically the A show. But I remember being in gym class. I was a freshman, and there was some guy who never took gym or maybe failed gym along the way. He was a sophomore or something like that. He wore a Four Horsemen shirt to school because he had been to the Nitro show the night before. I wasn't able to go to that. My first show that I ever went to by myself once I moved to my mom's house in Atlanta was basically going to the Hogan versus Goldberg show. Me and my friend Case went to that show. Where basically we bought tickets, and we bought them at the Publix, and that was, I remember, basically he wasn't really watching wrestling, but he had been a fan in the past, and he wanted to go, and I was just pumped that I had a friend that would be able to drive me down there. But basically, this guy wore an Four Horsemen shirt to gym class, and I just thought that was the most ballsiest move in the world, and that was my first thought of seeing that basically wrestling was becoming cool, where people were wearing wrestling shirts out on the town. Those nWo shirts, they sold like hotcakes. That was the first wrestling shirt that I ever bought. Probably the first wrestling shirt that I ever had. I remember my dad buying me the Hulk Rules bandana back in the day, something that I wish Vince and WWE Shop would re-release just so I could have one, even if I kept it in the packaging and never opened it. It just would be something that was special to me. I know that they have the Hulkamania one out there right now, but I just want that old school one from back in the day. I had my hopes when I saw they released the Hulk Rules t-shirt, and that was why I scooped that up so fast. But basically, with this episode, they've covered something that's already on DVD. I know I loved that first one so much, but basically, I thought that this started out like gold with some new interviews and talking about some different things. But by the time this show was over, I was ready for it to end. Next week's episode is going to talk about the Attitude Era. Of course, the Attitude Era was one of the best releases, I believe, last year, maybe the year before, on DVD and Blu-ray. I thought that, honestly, that set was made by the matches that were included on the set. The documentary, if I can remember, was only about a half hour. I thought that was a special that more than likely they were thinking about putting on the network at the time. But since the network hadn't launched yet, they went ahead and went with the DVD release and pushed that out. But I am looking forward to this, see how this goes out from here. But basically, I was thinking this was going to be one of the best things that WWE had ever done. Just however many shows, this was going to be an hour-long documentary every week talking about something along the way. But, seeing how this was about the nWo, and by the time the show was maybe 15 minutes in, they ran out of things to tell me that I had not known before. And next week's show is going to be about the Attitude Era, something that I saw a documentary about last year. I'm hoping that they have more stuff down the road. I know that the Attitude Era, I don't think this is normally going to be a show that debuts 2 episodes a week. I thought that it was supposed to be just 1 a week and string this along for a while, like a lot of the other shows that they've done on the network. But that's going to debut tomorrow. They showed Sable coming down to the ring, making it sort of seem like Sable was the biggest star. Maybe they're going to do their own episode on Stone Cold Steve Austin down the way, and maybe that's one reason why they sort of put her out there. But I honestly think that Sable was a big part of the Attitude Era. Definitely, she was one of those first stars that came on that they sort of pushed to the moon as some sort of sexy girl that everybody wanted to tune into Raw to make sure they saw what they could see. And I think a lot of people downplay about how big that angle was with her and Mark Marrow, with Mark Marrow trying to cover her up and not letting her show off her goods, and trying to keep them from herself. And basically, she wanted to become that star. It's almost like the reverse Linda Hogan and Hulk Hogan from Hogan's Knows Best, where basically she wanted to be a star so bad that Hulk, signed up for the reality show even though he didn't really want it and didn't think he was going to put his family in that light. And because of that, Linda ended up pushing out and trying to see how big that stardom was, only to, once the divorce happened and the show stopped, I don't really ever hear about Linda McMahon. I don't ever hear about Linda Hogan out there anymore. But nWo, one of the best factions of all time. Honestly, when this first came out, I sent out a tweet saying that this was way better than the last 2 documentaries. By the time it ended, it had some things in there, but if you had to rank the documentaries, more than likely, I still think that second set would probably be the best of the 3. But even that is a little bit of a letdown, seeing how if they would have waited a year, they could have got. I'm pretty sure they can get Bischoff right now. I don't think he's under TNA contract. I'm not 100% sure. But they definitely could probably get him in for a new interview. Definitely Hogan now, since he's under the WWE umbrella again, could have been on that set. Hall looks like he's to the point where WWE can start using him again. And instead of it just being, the Kevin Nash and X-Pac show, you could have had a whole lot more names in that documentary talking about what was going on. But this is definitely one of the hottest times in wrestling as a wrestling fan to relive. Just this episode let me down a little bit. Peace out.